Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. Today we're going to talk about this. Yes, it is gold. I'll just say that. It is gold. It is the response that the prosecutor made to Baldwin's attempt to get out of this, to file a motion to dismiss. And it is just outstanding. It's great legal writing, and it's great analysis, and it provides a much fuller picture of exactly what the prosecutors are dealing with in that case. Before we go too far, Alex Baldwin is presumed innocent until proved guilty in a court of law, and that hasn't happened yet. Things that the prosecution says should not be taken as absolute fact, and my criticisms, if any, of the counsel are my personal opinions, and they should not be construed as facts either. Now, Baldwin's counsel filed a motion to dismiss. In it, they alleged a lot of different things, including prosecutorial misconduct. They said the state wasn't playing fair. A lot of things these are the things that defense counsel do, and when you're paying them $1,000 an hour, they do whatever it is that you want done for the most part, because you're the client, and as long as it has the patina of being legitimate, you can, and I guess in some cases should, file it. I think it may be a question for later as to whether or not they should have filed their motion to dismiss, especially given the response that the state made. I'll get into that in just a moment. But what I wanted to talk about first was that the prosecutors here and the defense counsel have what amounts to a very bad relationship. They don't seem to get along, and both sides are throwing rocks at one another. Now, it's not our job as the public to figure out which one of them is lying and which one of them isn't. That's the court's job, and we'll let them do that. But I didn't want to put the motion to dismiss in first and then do this response, because it would have made the video way too long. So I'm going to start with the response, because that's the part that really, I think, nails what the state believes the facts will be in this case. And whether or not they actually get all of this in, of course, depends a great deal on the judge and the rules of evidence in the state of New Mexico. But it's very interesting to see what they've done here. The first thing that they do is they make note of the fact that police often do things that seem to be kind or seem to make them look like they're distracted and not paying attention, when in fact it is a very practiced move, something they've done hundreds of times before, and it works every time, and it worked in this case. So we'll take a look at what the prosecutors say after they've gone through explaining what happened and the accident and all of that. They talk about Baldwin getting ready for his first interview with the detectives. And let's look now at what they say about all of that. So this is from the state's response, and here is what they say. Ultimately, Mr. Baldwin arrived at the sheriff's department for a formal interview and was left momentarily in the interview room after the video recording of the interview began, but before detectives entered the room to begin speaking to Mr. Baldwin. Which just makes me laugh, because they turned that on for a reason, and they were richly rewarded for turning that video camera on. During this time, Mr. Baldwin, knowing that Ms. Hutchins had been critically injured and taken by helicopter to a nearby trauma center, began to make casual phone FaceTime video calls. Mr. Baldwin called his wife on speakerphone on FaceTime and another personal assistant employee regarding his family's upcoming trip to New Mexico. Baldwin's minor daughter was going to have a small part in the movie, and his family was planning to join him in New Mexico the following day. During these calls, Mr. Baldwin asked his family not to cancel the trip to New Mexico despite the tragedy. He explained, "I won't work and we'll go enjoy ourselves. It's all paid for. They're not going to give us the money back." Whew. So it occurred to me that perhaps I might want to consult with one of my experts, an expert that I use from time to time in trying to decipher the criminal mind, because this gentleman is an expert in that. He knows the ins and outs. And of course, I'm speaking about a frequent guest here on the channel by the name of Tony Two Toes. And he got that name because he had an unfortunate accident with a firearm. At least that's what I understand. He's never really confirmed that to me. All I get is this look whenever I ask him. So, at any rate, Tony, are you there?
Hey, you tell little Frankie he better be careful while he's, dividing up the spoils, so to speak. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you was already here. Now, what is it you wanted? Explain that to me, please.
Well, here's what I want to do. I want to ask you some questions about what the right thing to do is, and maybe even what the wrong thing to do is when you're arrested. Can you handle that for me?
Oh, yeah, perfectly. Yeah, I can do that for you. Here's what happens when you get pinched. And in case you're a little slow, that means you get arrested. Pay attention to the dialogue. You know what I'm saying? At the instant that you get pinched, one word should come out of your mouth. One word. And that word is lawyer. Lawyer, lawyer, lawyer. You keep saying that word, and that's the only word you say. You don't say good morning. You don't say good evening. You don't say things that you really shouldn't say on YouTube. You don't say any of that. You just say lawyer. And you let the lawyer do all the talking for you. Because if they got something on you, there's no sense helping them. And if they don't got nothing on you, you keep your mouth shut so they don't get nothing on you.
Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen what happens when someone makes a statement to the police that maybe they shouldn't make? Maybe they're not even aware that it's being recorded.
Well, yeah, I have seen that. I have seen people dig holes that they couldn't get back out of. Little Frankie, a couple of years ago, he gets popped. He's never been in a police station. He doesn't know that there's a camera up in the ceiling. He doesn't know that they're recording everything. They put him in the room with his cell phone, and the first thing he does is he calls his friend, Franco. He calls Franco and he says, "Hey, Franco, whatever you do, hide the loot from that bank job in the graveyard like we talked about, because I'm pretty sure they don't got nothing on us and we don't want them finding that loot." And of course, everything came in on the videotape, and little Frankie got to do a little vacation in a federal prison, which was really unfortunate for him. But we took care of the wife and kids while he was in there, because, he didn't explain what happened to the loot, which is a good thing, for him, if you know what I mean. Anyway, that's what I would tell you. That's the way you deal with it. Now, what happened with this Baldwin? What was his name?
You're thinking of Alec Baldwin. Yeah, he made a statement that he didn't know he was making. He went in and he made phone calls to his wife. It really made him look bad. And I suspect that's coming in at trial.
Oh, you have got to be kidding me.
I'm not kidding you. He made plans for the weekend after he just shot somebody. Can you believe it?
He made plans for a weekend after he just shot somebody?
And it was all recorded, and the police have it, and now he really looks bad, if you know what I mean.
Did he get paid for it?
He was making a movie at the time.
No, for the shooting.
Don't you get the news? He claims it was an accident.
An accident. I get it. Yeah, okay, I understand. Hey, look, I got real business to do here. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to get back to what I was doing earlier. And if you have any questions later on, we can talk about it.
You mentioned little Frankie. Is there a big Frankie?
Oh, you want to know about Big Frankie? We don't talk about Big Frankie. You wind up in a landfill in New Jersey. I'm just saying, we don't talk about Big Frankie.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that fine exposition on what happens when you get arrested, Tony. Hopefully that never happens to you again. Not that it hasn't happened a few times before. Anyway, have a great day, and I can catch you later, Tony. All right, there we have it. Right out of the horse's mouth. You don't want to do anything in a police interview room that you wouldn't want captured and broadcast on the TV news at 5 o'clock. It's just really stupid. And in this particular case, that's not all of the problem. One of the big problems that you have whenever you are in a situation where you are being asked questions, particularly by different interviewers, is you want to make sure that you tell the truth, first of all, always a best defense. And second of all, you want to make certain that you tell the same truth every time. Now, people look at me funny when I say the same truth, but here's the thing. There are different ways of explaining things, and you explain things differently in different contexts. To your friends, you might say, one moment I was sitting there talking to the lady, and the next moment she was bleeding out on the floor. And that's okay when you're talking to your friends. That makes perfect sense because you're not under any compulsion to tell the truth, and you're also not really worried about what other people might think of you when they hear that. But when you are in a police interview room, you need to assume that every single thing you say and do will be captured both on audio and on video. So if you're smiling when you talk about what happened, that's going to be picked up on the video, and it doesn't look good for you. It makes you look like you have zero compassion, and you're just glad you weren't shot. And I think it's fairly obvious that given some of the things that are in this response, it's a wonder that he did not get shot himself. So let's take a look as we go through what the state says the facts are in this case, or at least some of them. Now, I want to start off by pointing out that it is readily apparent from the tone of this memorandum that the prosecutors do not like the defense counsel. And I will point that out particularly as we go along. But this is the best part, I think, right here. The defendant's motion to dismiss is a predictably false, misleading, and histrionic misrepresentation of the facts and circumstances of the history of the case. 2 special prosecutors have been assigned to the prosecution of Mr. Baldwin, have experienced nearly countless lies and manipulation from the defense for more than a year. In addition, we have, and certainly will continue to be, the subject of the defendant's contrived and unwarranted personal attacks. The primary goal of Mr. Baldwin and his counsel, which now numbers 8 total attorneys, Heather LeBlanc, local counsel who, despite her reputation for hard work and competence, has been relegated to largely menial tasks, Alex Spiro, New York, like the way they threw that in there, Luke Nickus, New York, John Bash, Texas, Sarah Clark, Texas, Michael Nashanchuk, New York, Jennifer Stern, New York, and Stephanie Kellerman, New York. I guess it doesn't hurt to remind the judge that these are out-of-towners here at the invitation, so to speak, of the state of New Mexico, and that they are admitted pro hoc vice for the purposes of this case to represent Mr. Baldwin. And as a result, you need to hold them to the same standards that you would hold a New Mexico attorney. Anyway, it goes on to say, is to ensure that the case is not heard on its merits, and if it is heard on its merits, to discredit the prosecution, investigation, and witnesses in the media so that a conviction becomes unlikely for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with Mr. Baldwin's criminal culpability. It is the job of the special prosecutors to investigate the case and fairly and impartially prosecute the case, and we will continue to do so despite the defendant's relentless attempts to discredit and intimidate the prosecution and the courageous witnesses who continue to participate in the struggle for justice for Helena Hutchins and her family. Given the exhaustive nature of the defendant's motion to dismiss, we will begin the response by providing a recitation of the factual and procedural history of the case as we know it. So it talks about how Mr. Baldwin was the person who decided to produce this. It was written by Joel Souza, one of the people who was shot. Baldwin hired Souza to write the screenplay and sold the rights to Rust Productions, LLC. So Baldwin bought the rights, then he sold it to an LLC that he controlled. Mr. Baldwin later became the lead producer of the film. According to the film's call sheet, Mr. Baldwin is the top listed producer and the lead actor in the film. This was Mr. Baldwin's project, and that fact is clear when viewing the many video clips from the filming of the movie and interviewing the crew members, Mr. Baldwin was in charge. So it talks about how he hired Gutierrez, and she wasn't really that experienced. It says, Alec Baldwin arrived on the set a week after filming began. His late arrival caused him to miss the initial firearms training offered to actors by Ms. Gutierrez. Baldwin's late arrival made it necessary for Ms. Gutierrez to schedule a separate training session for Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Baldwin was inattentive during this training and spent the time during the training on the phone with his family and making videos of himself shooting the gun for his family's enjoyment. Upon arriving on the set, Mr. Baldwin immediately began demanding the crew and the armorer work faster. Mr. Baldwin's relentless rushing of the crew on the movie set routinely compromised safety because Rust is not a romantic comedy. It's an action-filled Western with dangerous stunts and real guns being used as props. In addition to rushing the cast and crew, Mr. Baldwin was frequently screaming and cursing at himself, at cast members, at no one, and not for any particular reason. To watch Mr. Baldwin's conduct on the set of Rust is to witness a man who has absolutely no control of his emotions and absolutely no concern for how his conduct affects those around him. Witnesses have testified that this was the exact conduct that contributed to the safety compromises on the set. Well, this beauty goes on for dozens of pages, and it talks about his lack of emotional control. It talks about his initial recorded interview with the detectives, what occurred after he made a complete jerk of himself on the film, on the video before they came in. It talks about how his story changed when he talked to George Stephanopoulos, because when he talked to the detectives, he didn't say anything about not pulling the trigger. He didn't say he didn't pull the trigger until he got in front of George Stephanopoulos. At least that's according to the information presided by the government here in this particular memorandum. And then after he made his propaganda piece with George Stephanopoulos, who, by the way, according to the prosecution, is a personal friend of Mr. Baldwin, he then had to give an interview with the OSHA investigators. And once again, his story changed a second time. And then it talks about how the defense attorneys tried to convince the prosecution that this was somehow the gun's fault, that the gun was modified or broken in some way when he was using it, and about their extensive efforts to discern whether or not that was in fact the case. They did the right thing here. The prosecutors dismissed the charges until they could investigate the gun. They sent it to the FBI. The FBI sent it back and said the gun works just fine, and they explained how it happened. They also provided testimony in the Gutierrez-Reed case, where they explained how they tested the firearm and what they did with it, and how when they hit it with a hammer, it went off because the firing pin sits right above the primer. But when it is in the cock or half-cock positions, it won't go off unless the trigger is depressed. And then they go through the fact that he talked about in one of his interviews how he'd never heard it hit the half-cock position or the full-cock position, and that is a clear indication that he had the trigger depressed at the time. Because if you have the trigger depressed, you won't hear those things. So basically, this is the state laying out everything they've got, airing all of their dirty laundry, and basically calling the defense counsel bottom feeders. That's basically what they're doing here. The actual response goes for 326 pages. 326 pages is a lot of pages. And the memorandum only goes for, I think, 26 pages, but then the exhibits and everything else that follows, which include the transcripts and that sort of thing, all of that goes for 300 pages, and it has lots of information. They give Dropbox links in it for the court to go and access certain other exhibits, I think some video that they believe is important. And I was not able to find this on the New Mexico court's site. I was able to find it sort of freestanding, and I downloaded it from the place where it was. But this is a remarkable pleading, and it lays out I think it lays out a much stronger case against Baldwin than it does against Gutierrez-Reed. Now, one of the things that they point out here is how inexperienced Gutierrez-Reed was. And they held her accountable for accepting the assignment, which, okay, I think that's fair. But the person who should have known better and who had been in Hollywood a lot longer than Gutierrez-Reed, Baldwin, it says in here, among other things, that he went from saying he knew everything about guns to basically saying he knew nothing about guns, and it's really hard to know which story to believe, especially when it comes to gun safety, because one of the things that the state points out here is that he's trying to blame Helena Hutchins, which is not what he did in his first interview. He's trying to blame Helena Hutchins for telling him to point the gun at her. And when you blame the victim, you come off as a complete heel. Now, I don't know whether Mr. Baldwin is guilty of this or not. I don't know whether all of these representations in the state's pleading are true or not. He is innocent until proven guilty, and that's an important disclaimer to understand. We can't decide this case on the basis of the state's memorandum. And he will be very well represented at trial. As you can see, he's got a team of lawyers from out of state. And here's the funny part about that. I have yet to see any big corporation or anybody that has a lot of money come into a rural circuit court or a rural district court, in this case, and do well with out-of-town counsel. One of the things that I recite from my experience in the state's trial team for tobacco was how they brought in this guy in a $3,000 suit from New York to argue on behalf of British American Tobacco, and how we absolutely filleted him on our part of the presentation with his own exhibits in the affidavit that he served. And I think that a lot of times people from out of town just naturally expect that they're coming into New Mexico. These people are a bunch of rubes. Heck, they've probably never even tried a murder case. I mean, we'll just make idiots out of them. That's what we'll do. And we'll confuse them. We'll do the old flipperoo. We'll throw as much stuff up against the wall as possible. And at the end of the day, we'll walk away counting our money. And Mr. Baldwin will go back to making, videos and movies. And if he doesn't go back to making movies, well, we'll still count our money. So I think sometimes that works against the defendant. And I'm not saying these defense counsel are necessarily those kinds of people. But if you read this memo, that is exactly the impression that you get away with. And again, all of this is my opinion. I am not stating facts here. I am stating my opinion about sort of the generic way in which this case is defended and the way in which the prosecution is talking about that. So that's what I have for you today. Hopefully you found this interesting. I wish I had a way to post a link to the actual filed copy of this memorandum, but if you Google it, eventually you will find the state's response, as long as you ask for the filing on Google. I tried it with DuckDuckGo. I could not find it. When I tried it with Google and I used the word filing, it came up, I think, in the second or third set of responses. So I just point that out in the event you do want to go look at it. And again, that's what I have for you. If you have the opportunity today, do something kind and make it count. Maybe you can donate something to a particular charity. Maybe you can just help a neighbor who has a problem. Sit down and listen. A lot of times, all we need to do a real kind thing for people is just listen to them tell their story and express our empathy, not our sympathy, but our empathy with them. That goes a long way. One of the things I learned early on in healthcare, and that I carried over into my legal career, is that you have to listen with your mouth closed. I share that because a lot of people think the best way to express empathy is to talk while the other person's talking, and that rarely works. Tony Two Toes actually does that a lot, in case you hadn't noticed. At any rate, thank you very much for being here. After you have done something kind for someone, come on back down here and join me at the beach tomorrow, and we'll talk about something else interesting. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.